Volume 7 C-103. They were halfway back to the town when Brain asked, "Suppose we get there, find out it's not what we expected and take her back. We still have the same problem that made us leave her there in the first place." She thought that one over. She scratched her head and swept her hair back before looking in his direction and saying, "I kind of have one idea." "Wait, really?" he asked and blinked several times in the darkness. Her lips formed a somewhat chastised pout. "You don't have to say that like it's impossible. And if you laugh I'll slap you." "I wouldn't dream of it," he said while suppressing a chuckle, "not after knowing the way you kick." He rubbed his ribs and made an exaggerated wince. "Right. Sorry, I just know. No excuses. I judged you after you've helped look after us. As strong as I am, I have no idea how to live on my own." Zesh's face was blank when she said it, but of all the things he knew about her, she wasn't prone to saying things she didn't mean. "Thank you. Again. But it's fine, I've largely healed. I heal quickly, I'm lucky that way," Brain said to her, and then after clearing his throat he pressed, "Your idea? Oh. Right. So the slain theocracy is a very formal kind of country. Raymond used to complain about it, so did Dominic. It was the one thing they both agreed on. They treated representatives and rulers very differently from individuals. Burning and destroying a village was one thing, but it's a long-standing rule to not target diplomats. Heads of state. Maybe, but that's a rough one, especially if it will hurt them." She saw his mouth form a wide O shape and the trace of a smile formed on her face as she saw his understanding dawn. "So, actually try to win the tournament and take the throne?" Brain's mind began to spin as she explained. "Sure, if I'm the Empress of the Baharuth Empire, they probably wouldn't dare to strike at me unless they had no other choice. Targeting Layali would also be out of the question. She's nothing to them. They have a snowball's chance in hell of working out her origins or that she'd have a lifelong grudge against them. And they can't afford to be the cause of the Empire's complete collapse. So, all I have to do is win, and who in the world can hope to defeat me?" She asked with a smug upturn of her jaw. "That could work. It might actually be a good idea." Brain thought it over and began to rub the faint blue scraggle of a beard that was starting to form on his face. "Was it necessary to put it that way?" she asked him with a pointed stare that robbed her face of its smugness. "Maybe not. But hey, maybe it's the first of many?" He winked, shrugged, and she coaxed her horse close to him, then bopped her shoulder against his, sending him tumbling to the ground. He rolled immediately to his feet and she added, "Having sex with you was also my idea. Although, I guess it was only a pretty good idea." She taunted and cantered her horse ahead. Brain's laughter followed behind her as he remounted his horse and quickly caught up with her again. "I suppose I had that one coming. I can practically hear the women of the world saying, 'Yes, you did.' And who am I to argue? The person who maybe wants a repeat performance?" she asked him. "I assumed that was a one-time thing," he replied, and for a moment she was quiet about it. "You were my first," she said, and all the mirth was gone. "I always assumed the first time I did it would be with someone stronger than me. I always assumed. Gods. How fucked up am I?" "She?" he asked and leaned a little closer. "My mother was humanity's trump card, before me. The strongest of the strong, but my father still took her and forced her to have me. I used to look at myself and see the parts of my father. And how I hated him. I dreamed of the day I could kill him. But I suppose I just always assumed that I'd have my mother's life. Right down to its worst part, having me. That someone would defeat me, and I'd have a child, just like she was defeated, and had a child. I never realized how screwed up everything is. My handlers over the years, except for Raymond and my mother, always encouraged me to have strong children. The handful of godkin we have, they're encouraged to sleep with lots of women. Senna has cut a wide swath in particular." She tightened her hands on the reins of her horse. "I just assumed it'd be. But then that night when she inhaled heavily and then let it out. I never thought it would be something I enjoyed. It never occurred to me that I died like that person." "Your country failed you bad," Brain said with a glare in the direction of the theocracy. "Maybe so. Maybe so." She answered him, turning her eyes in the same direction as himself, and they rode on in silence until the town came into view. Brain, however, had his mind on other things. Empress Shizetsume. It does have a nice ring to it. He turned his thoughts to that, and then pictured Layali in the clothing of a princess. She'll be safe there, she'll have a good life, she'll have everything a girl could want. Zeshi is unbeatable. The more he thought, the better it sounded. I'll miss her though. Her and Layali. Once they're empress and princess, there's no way I can stay. I was wrong before, this is what will be for the best. Layali took one look at her bed and immediately missed Brain's cloak and the grass. The wooden frame was more like termites hugging one another to hold it together, cracked and full of holes. She had to wonder, will this even hold me up? A look around the room where 30 other beds sat around suggested that, no, it might very well not. Some of the beds were collapsed at either the head or the feet, tilting them down one way or the other. The blanket was worn thin and clearly cut from a larger horse blanket. It had rips and holes aplenty, and was badly frayed along the edges. Worse, it was thin, offering no real security against any chill if and when that hit. As to her mattress, there was none. The flat frame just had straw heaped on it, and a bundled set of straw served as a pillow. Home sweet home. Even my no. Brain is papa now. Even the man who made me, gave us better than this. At least they had the sense to split us up between girls and boys, old and young. She thought as she bent over the bed and began rustling the old, dry, golden straw around to make it into something comfortable to sleep on. Recalling her life on her creator's estate, there had been no real privacy to speak of, and it wasn't uncommon to hear moans in the darkness as two tried to find some pleasure amidst their bleak existence. So life's most basic mysteries were long resolved in her mind, and she had to acknowledge that Lady Grill, if she was indeed in charge, had at least some sense. Again the thought came to her to run. But where? She asked as the noise of the lock outside clicked shut. The door was in good shape, and the one window was very small. If there was a way out, it wasn't apparent. Zeshi would just slap the door apart with the back of her hand and boom, that would be that. Brain would. I don't know, cut it in half with his sword. Probably. That made her smile sadly, and she got into her bed of straw. She curled up on her side, rested her head on what passed for a pillow and pulled the rough, scratchy rag of a blanket over her body. Her curled form became tight as a ball and her eyes squeezed shut to hide the enclosed room. The noise of the others was dying down and snoring quickly followed. Come get me. Please come get me. I don't want to be here. Layali said in prayers to a god she couldn't name, and repeated it until she finally fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Volume 7 C 104. It was late in the morning when Brain and Zeshi rode into town again, and as such, the booming activity of the place left Brain optimistic. Why are we pulling in here? Zeshi asked as Brain steered his horse toward a tavern. I'm not really thirsty, or hungry. Me neither, but before we go over there. He closed his mouth and dismounted his horse. While he secured it to the hitching post outside the building he went on, I was so damn set on making sure she was safe from what I was worried about with us. I didn't stop to think about what a place around here could be like. I assumed it would be better, and that what you paid would be enough to give her a good life. We both did, Zeshi said with compassion as she got down off of her horse and secured it beside his own. But I am supposed to know better. But maybe I was wrong. Brain clenched his fist and pointed to the tavern. Like most of the buildings they'd seen, the exterior is fairly clean, which was in its favor. The door was propped open, and inside Brain could already see people working. If I was, we'll find out here. The orphanage is close by, chances are people who work around it, stop here to eat or drink. We just have to be discreet. Follow my lead, Brain said and adopted a calm, almost stately stride. He entered the tavern and went to sit at the bar. Behind it stood an orc woman, her tusks were bared in her version of a smile. Higher, she said and flipped 2 mugs over her head from behind her back. They landed squarely in front of Zeshi and Brain, and before the pair could say anything, she had a barrel on her shoulder and pulled the tap. A stream of dark beer began to slosh around in Brain's mug, and without missing a beat or spilling a drop, she did the same with Zeshi's. Then just like that, she yanked the tap free, corked the barrel, and sat down. Name's Tama, welcome to my place and enjoy the beer, that'll be 2 coppers each. But we didn't, Zeshi began, but Tama, who was as shapely as any radiant young human woman, and buxom in the way that orc women tended to be, with broad shoulders and a pine-green skin, would have none of it. "Nah, this is my place. It's better if I tell you what to drink. I always know, just trust me. You don't like it, I'll give you each 4 coppers, Tama said and rested her forearm on the bar. She gave them a wink and waited. Brain ran with it. The mug was simple wooden slats sealed with black tar, but the foam was a creamy tan and he could smell the fermented mash. He snatched up the mug, smacked his lips together and tilted it back to start drinking. Not to be outdone, after one more lingering look down at the brew, she brought it to her lips and drank. It was thick, rich, with an oaky flavor that ran smooth down her throat and filled her empty belly with a stuffed, warm feeling. Brain reached into his pouch and dropped 4 coppers between them. "You know your stuff," he said, and Tama gave a porcine snort. "I've been working on the job for years, and my papa was a brewer, and his father for him, and my mama was the same. Used to do this stuff out in the Abelian Hills way back when, and my family still got brewers out there, brothers and sisters. So that right there," she pointed 2 fingers at their now empty mugs, "is generations of orc beer making." "So how'd you end up out here?" Brain asked. "We're a long way from Demalbian. When things opened up, we wanted to branch out, figured the White Tusk name ought to be known everywhere. I'll pit my name against any brewer anywhere, man, elf, even dwarf if it comes down to it. Anywho, I take one look at someone, and I know what they need to drink. And you too, you ate nothing, so you need something for to fill you both up, and what tastes good going down." She had a twinkle in her dark eyes when she spoke, as if it were her own children she spoke of when she talked of her work. "Well, it holds up, that's for sure. I understand the need to expand, but I'm surprised to see you here alone." Brain remarked and looked around. She clearly wasn't alone. A pair of waitresses were speaking to people at 2 different tables. But behind the bar, there was at least only herself. "I mean, with the orphanage nearby, you could probably hire someone to work where you are right now and then you could spend more time making this magnificent stuff." Brain tapped a finger on the mug, and Tama's demeanor slipped a little. "That's where I got my waitresses over there." The orc woman pointed to the busy servers. They wore simple dresses that came down knee-length and were simple green and white patterned, coming up to straps over their shoulders. "I don't do that now though. Bad business really. Don't much care for 'em," Tama said, subdued and briefly focusing her eyes on the 2 honey-blonde women. "4 orphans, what's wrong with orphans?" he asked and slid his mug back over to her. "Nah, kids is fine, it's the place they at, right nasty business. You want my advice, if you look in for a kid just this side of a slave and just knows to follow orders, that's the place for you. Them 2 told me about it when they got here." She inclined her head toward the pair. "Beating up little uns, and making them do some right back break-in work. You wouldn't think it, but there's a lot of money to be made off the kids." Tama reflexively got up and filled both their mugs again. "So you don't do business with them?" Brain asked as he put down 4 copper coins. "Nah, some do. Farmers do, sometimes smiths, folk who need labor or apprentices. And every now and then a traveler picks up a kid. Sometimes it ends up good, like. Not that long ago someone bought all 3 kids." Tama stopped when Brain and she spoke at once. "Bought?" they said, before Brain asked, "Like they're slaves?" "Yes and no. Labor contracts. But they might as well be slaves. They can't read it, and nobody asks them if they want to sign. They were lucky though, since all 3 went together. Most times, they get split up." Tama explained, then asked, "So, how far do you 2 come from anyhow?" "Really far," she answered. "And really, really far," Brain answered. Tama scratched her. "Right then, listen. It's just not a great place, they don't eat much, the old folks who run it. I don't let them in my bar, but I can't do much. The mayor makes his money supplying the place, and there's not one kid in there who's got anyone who gives a shit covered copper what happens to 'em. My advice, don't have anything to do with anyone who works there, because they'll do anything for a silver." "Nobody does anything. Aren't there crimes involved here?" she asked, and Tama couldn't help but give a low chuckle. She set both her green hands on the bar and stood up straight. "Listen honey, them kids in there, They were mostly street kids, criminals. The mayor, he's an upstanding citizen. If a street kid tells someone it's rain, most folk'll look up just to be sure, even if they outside getting wet, and they'll clutch their coin purse tight while they check. Nobody'd believe 'em, and even if they do, what of it? Shut the place down and put 'em on the street? Shut down the mayor, his business. Lot of folks lose work and end up homeless as them kids. So they let it pass. Right, that. I could see that. But what if? I know places like that take support, like people who travel and can't bring their children. Brain suggested, and Tama only pointed to her waitresses who had moved on to other tables. They got a potato and one piece of fruit to eat, not much else. Their folks never came back for 'em. From what I hear tell, nobody comes back. The empire may not be here anymore, but this new kingdom. Well, some money has come out this way, it's safer to travel, but nobody doing nothing any different. And again, even if they did? Lot of them kids is the kids of folks who fought the new king. Who's gonna stick their neck out for those and risk him getting mad over it? A good point, Brain said as he polished off his beer and set it down. He stood up again while she drained her own and said, only a mad fool would stick their neck out for everyone. But maybe doing so for one isn't such a bad thing. Tama looked at him with questioning eyes, but he only smirked, drew out a silver coin and flipped it from his finger to land on the bar directly in front of her. It wobbled audibly until it came to a stop, but by the time she looked up after snatching it away, the pair were gone. That's an odd couple there. Tama muttered and flipped the coin behind her into a waiting jar, and then set about clearing what was left behind. Layali stood in line. Her good clothes, those acquired for her by Brain and Zeshi, were gone when she woke up that morning. Her belly rumbled, but there was an order to the day, that was clear. In her arms sat a folded set of somewhat serviceable clothing, a little bit better than what she privately called the potato class of orphans. However, she wore nothing, none of the girls did. Instead they were lined up in front of the well. The sound of a splash came out from ahead of her. A squeal, the noise of a thwack of a cane. A muted cry that made Layali's nerves stand on end. Then a minute or two later a drenched but clothed girl scampered into view to stand in line with those who went before her. Next, Lady Gruul shouted, and Layali took one step forward. The creaking noise of the wheel made her cringe away until a hand went to the small of her back, forcing her to stop. The squeak of the wheel, the squeal of the girl and the desperate, but short flight to the next line, it all seemed to go on, and on, and on. Finally it came her turn. The old woman was clad in severe clothing, a long dress that hung down to her ankles and was buttoned up to her throat, a scowl on her face. Her cane smacked the rusty wheel. Turn it, draw the bucket up. You don't expect an old woman to do the work for you, do you, you spoiled little brat? She snapped down at the little half-elf. Layali stepped aside, set her clothing on the ground, and endured that deep frown and disapproving look on the wrinkled face. She then stood on top of a stool placed beside it, and began to grunt as she pushed. It fought her as hard as it could. The rusted wheel's resistance kept it from going at more than a snail's pace. But rendered stronger than average by hard labor and long travels, she progressed. Turn after turn, rotation after rotation, the round stone well gave up its water. Hurry up, Lady Gruul snapped, but Layali saw the little twitch in the corner of the woman's eye. She wants to provoke me. Layali knew, it was a familiar twitch to her, seen often in the eyes of her creator's human wife who did not care for the trysts of her husband with the stock. So Layali played the game. She kept turning the wheel until the bucket rose within reach. Now dump it on yourself, we can't have you stinking all day. Lady Gruul snapped, and Layali grabbed the bucket, hefted it over her head, and tilted it over herself. Ice-cold water from within the earth washed over her entire body, stabbing her like tiny pinpricks for a moment. She stifled her cry, but not her shiver. Get dressed, brat. Then get in line with the others. There's work to do. Lady Gruul spat, and Layali rushed herself into the patchwork clothing and scurried as the others had before her. The rough clothing scratched at Layali's skin from head to toe, but when she reached the line, she stayed as they did, hands in front of her and eyes down, waiting to be called on with the other 20 or so before her. Splash, crank, cry, and thwack. were the only noises she heard for the next half hour until it was done. Except for the growing rumble. She brought hand up and touched her belly, pressing against it. The big meals, near feasts that she'd grown accustomed to with brain and zest. She seemed years behind her at that moment. But they fed me. Those things happened. They love me. They tried to protect me. The high walls in this back area at least protected what modesty she still had left, and boys and girls were bathed separately, but nonetheless it was a relief to trudge away from the ugly routine. I wonder where we eat? Layali thought and followed the others, but when the hallway was the same, she closed her sky-blue eyes. I'm not going back in there, this is all a dream. She tried to tell herself while she passed through the door frame and found herself at another stool, with a bolt of fabric and other materials ready to sew. However, mercifully, there was also a bowl. Food. At the promise of it, even in the form of an empty wooden bowl which, when she looked at it, could have been cleaner, her belly gnawed at her like a wild beast. The dry taste of potato was like ashes in her mouth, but even that would have been preferable to the tasteless air. She practically bit it just in the hopes of eating something. Two limping young boys hobbled in, this time pushing a cart with a large-bellied cast-iron pot. Though the young boys, being skinny as they were, and clearly injured, struggled. They did make progress. As one pushed, the other scooped, and the thick wet plopping noise of grey-looking gruel went into one bowl after another. Layali began to shift on her stool and reached back to rub the bruised part of her bottom. If she avoided moving much, that hurt too, but between that and the promise of food? Remaining still was a battle she was losing. Finally they reached her. Half for that one. She's disrespectful, Jose said with stern reproof. Layali looked up at the two boys, and watched the grey lumps fill barely a quarter of her bowl. Her stomach seemed to be biting at her. She clutched it with one hand and without thinking she held up her bowl. Please. Please, can I have some more? I'm so hungry. She pled with angry tears in her eyes. More? Brat. You need discipline more than you need food. Jose, are you going easy on these whelps? Lady Gruel snapped from the end of the aisle where she stood waiting for the two serving boys to finish. Of course not, he snapped and began to hasten forward, his cane slapping the floor with every heavy step. All around her, Layali saw heads go down to their tables and every child's hands folded over the back of their heads. No. She wanted to scream, but no words came out. The young boys hobbled back to press themselves against the wall. Try to disgrace me. You'll learn who is in charge here, little girl. Jose reached out and grabbed the back of Layali's neck and forced her to bend over the desk. Her bowl went flying away and clattered to the floor. Her belly rumbled again, but it could not drown out Jose's voice. I'm in charge here. Not you. You do what I say do. He barked, his cane went up, her eyes went wide. Ma. Pa. I want ma. I want pa. She yowled and screeched like a banshee. Lady Gruel stepped in front of the table, her hands folded in front of her waist, a prim and perfect pose as unmoving as stone. We're your parents now. Lady Gruel snapped with a disapproving look down her nose. The hell you are. Like twin battle cries uttered in unison, so thunderous that it carried through door and through wall. Just before both were smashed inward into splinters and rubble. Volume 7 C 105. Jose didn't truly have time to process it. His eyes saw the rubble, the dust and splinters, but before he truly understood what was happening or why, he felt himself choking. His feet kicked at empty air, and his own body's weight held him inexorably against a hand of steel. He gurgled and gasped, his own hands came up to claw at the one to hold him there, but prying those fingers free proved to be an exercise in futility. What were you doing to my daughter? Brain bellowed the final word, and shook the feeble man like a rag doll. The cane, he dropped, and it landed on the table. Jose's fingertips teased at it, sought it out, urging it closer. Can't breathe. Hurting me. He choked out. Beyond him, he could see a woman with black and white hair who, in crude terms, was busy kicking the shit out of Lady Gruel. You were supposed to look after her. Is this what you thought we meant? Brain bellowed up. His face a twisted mask of wrath and fury. He twisted at the hip and slammed the old man's back down against the table. It shattered from the force and Jose gasped and coughed as any remaining wind was knocked out of his lungs. Layali jumped against him and wrapped her arms around his waist, Various small heads came up to watch the impossible scene. Brain put his arm down over her shoulder and against her back. "Did he hurt you?" Brain asked, his eyes going from Layali to the old man. "Uh-huh. Bad. It hurts to sit, and they were going to make us work for them all day long, and they made me dunk freezing water on me, and they took my things and they made me sleep on a busted bed and old straw, and all they fed me was one potato. I hate this place and I wanna leave." She shouted it all and began bawling. Brain only glowered down at the figure that still hadn't formed words. Not far away, Zeshi, having heard Layali start to bawl, raised her foot and stomped hard on the woman's elbow. The crack was audible, as was the cry of pain. "You were paid a fortune to take care of her. And this is what you do?" Zeshi snapped and brought her foot down on the knee of Lady Grill. "Which hand did he use to hit you?" Brain asked, and down below, Jose felt the eyes of a reaper of the battlefield looming over him. "That one." Layali pointed to the right hand of the old man. Other than Zeshi, he was sure nobody saw his sword move, only the act of returning it to its sheath. Jose blinked his eyes, slow confusion followed, he brought his arms up to guard himself. Don't the plea died in his throat when, after holding up his arms to protect himself, he saw that his right hand was missing and a stream of blood was coming out. "That means he used the other hand to hold you in place." Brain stomped his foot down on the arm that still had a hand, pinning it to his chest. Layali could not see what he did when he crouched down, but the audible crack of snapping bone after snapping bone was enough to make her wince. Even if not one wince had pity to it. "We're taking you out of here." "I'm sorry we left you here," Brain said, ignoring the broken, howling figure who would not be moving again for quite some time. "My hands." Jose's voice was beginning to fade. "Layali. Bind the hand, I don't want him to die." "Not yet," Brain said when the old man began to fall limp. Quick as a whip she took a pair of scissors, cut the cloth she was expected to work with, and began to bandage and bind the hand to cut the blood flow off. Brain put his boot down on Jose's neck. The pressure was light, but terrorized eyes bulged with the dread that the pressure was coming. "Do you have any idea just how thoroughly you've screwed yourself?" he asked when Layali rose and went back to clinging to Brain's side. Gurgles were Jose's only answer. "That," he pointed to the half-elven woman who was dragging Lady Grill over. The old woman moaned and tried weakly to protest, but with Zeshi's hand on the end of her hair, dragging the old woman across the floor was easy. "Is Zeshi Zetsume? She's an official representative from the slain theocracy, and you've just beaten her daughter." Even the groans stopped as the fury doubled. "She has direct ties to their elite forces, and when they find out what you've done." Brain's voice rose an octave and he put a little pressure on the old man's throat, then lifted it away as the thudding and slamming and desperate flailing of a broken hand and a handless arm slapped against his boot. "But it's their way to give their prey a head start. We're leaving, and we're taking her with us, and you. As soon as we've finished business in our winter, you're the next business." Brain hocked his spittle as loud as he could, and then spat, hard, directly into Jose's eye. "How'd you do that?" Zeshi asked while she put herself at Brain's side. "What? You've never hocked one on somebody before?" Brain raised an eyebrow at her while Zeshi's hand unconsciously drifted to stroke Layali's head. No, I haven't." "Tell me how," Zeshi almost demanded. "Hawk it back through the nose, like breathing really hard so it's at the back of your throat, then spit it all out at once," Brain explained. "Can I try, Mama?" Layali asked and looked hopefully up at Zeshi with big, puppy dog eyes. "Please do," Zeshi answered with a wink, and the two half-elves began. Gag-like noises went up as they tilted their heads back, and then two large wads of mucousy spit arced through the air to land on the face of Lady Grill. "You'll live long enough for us to chase you. And I'll be reporting this place to the king of this country," Zeshi said with icy hate as they squirmed on their backs. Countless small faces looked at them with a mix of fear, hope, confusion, dismay. But the pair had eyes only for one. "It's terrible here. Can we just leave?" Layali pled. "I don't want to be here anymore." "Yes, we're leaving," Brain said and picked her up in his arms. She was warm to the touch, and with the danger clearly passing away and reunited with the pair in safety. She began to tremble like a leaf as her adrenaline rush wore off. Her face began to redden as she was carried out and she began to cry with tears of happiness. They said you wouldn't come back. They said they were my parents now. I didn't like it. I knew you'd come back. We never should have left. She acknowledged when they descended the stairs. How long do you think those two will run for, once they're able to move again, that is? Brain rubbed his chin and scooched Layali a little higher up so she could hold her arms around his neck. I would say the rest of their lives, just at a guess. And that will do. Still, it's strange that nobody interrupted us. Probably the noise, she said with a dismissive shrug, when they reached the place where their horses were tethered. Shouldn't that be the opposite? Brain inquired. He set Layali on his horse, inching her up toward the mane and taking care to place her as gently down as he could. Not really. Once when we raided a vampire lair, I interrogated a vampire minion for a good while. His screams didn't draw any attention. Raymond told me it's because they were used to screams. That place was probably used to all kinds of ugly noises and anyone who heard it assumed just one kid snapped and put up a fight. Convenient for us at least. It'll be hours before anybody realizes anything is wrong unless the kids in there say anything. But still, we should pick up the pace. We still have a tournament to get to, and even if it is going to run for weeks, I'd rather not miss it all. Brain gave a wolfish grin to the half-elf. I look forward to seeing how I do against you next time. Maybe I'll even win. She threw back her head and laughed. That'll be the day, she said, wiped tears of laughter from her eyes, and without a word, they spurred their horses and began to ride north as fast as their horses could carry them. Volume 7 C 106. The golden wheat-colored wood of the great hall was filled with light. The sun streamed in through great glass windows, and the wood gleamed like an angel's halo. In the center of the hall was a long table holding the delegates of great nations. The Dragon Lords of Argland, the oligarchs of the City-State Alliance, the delegates of the Minotaur Kingdom, the Ogre Kingdom, the Wyvern Kingdom, even the Devore Empire, the nation of beastmen who thought all those at the table to be food themselves, had someone present. Ein seated himself between his wives, with Albedo to his right hand and Kalka to his left. Beside Albedo sat Draudillan, and beside Kalka sat Naya. At Draudillan's right hand sat Henry, while at Naya's left hand sat Renna. The seats were still filling up when Raymond arrived. At the door the crier, a young man with a black and white butler's suit, who stood stiff with feet shoulder-width apart, one arm folded behind his back, and one hand holding the door open, called out the new entry. Cardinal Raymond Zargloranson of the slain theocracy. Some eyes turned to meet his, some did not. But the moment his name passed the crier's lips, Raymond felt one pair very keenly. Queen Baraha. Her baleful stare was the only one he felt that was truly full of hatred. The cardinal braced himself and tugged on the white and golden robe he wore for the occasion. Nu's words lingered still in his ear, make allies for yourself. She'd given that advice while she assisted him with his clothing. Her deft and practiced hands performed each task to perfection, leaving not a wrinkle or loose binding. If only she'd come with me? He thought, but her refusal came again even though he insisted her presence would help. It was still unclear to him just why she refused, but her simple question shut him down. Are you going to command me? He refrained, and let the matter drop. So, alone he entered, and with stately, long strides as if he were a nation's king, he entered the hall and chose his seating with care. He sat down beside the Golden Queen Renna. Naya's eyes lost a hint of her hostility. Cardinal, so nice to see you here, Renna said with her glowing smile. Yes. Here, Naya said, robbing his choice of seating of its subtlety. Subtle as a club to the face, that one. Raymond briefly mused, but answered, thank you, it was a hard road but I made it. I'm here, he said emphatically, though his eyes fell longer on Naya than they needed to with Renna. It seemed at first he would have to spell it out for her, until Renna put a hand on Naya's thigh and squeezed. Naya's eyes went to the source of the touch, and then back upward to Renna. The Golden Queen gave the tiniest of nods. Then the hostility of the dragonid queen that felt like her talons tearing into his flesh, began to fade away. Raymond watched Naya's expression change. The deep frown became a thin line on her face and she asked, I heard you were traveling with a slave the rest of the way here. Where is it? Naya searched his face for answers, her question a somewhat feeble attempt at being subtle. I see I've had tabs kept on me. I suppose that's unsurprising, but if you want to know, I have none. If you doubt me, come to my quarters and meet her for yourself," Raymond retorted. Nia rolled her eyes, a strange thing to see when they were vertical slits, and said, "It's so much easier to be subtle in warfare." "I'm sure you'll be fine, you just need practice," Rena answered and gave Nia's leg a little pat as if she were praising a student who was trying ever so hard to grasp a difficult lesson. The burst of laughter that came from Raymond's mouth was utterly and completely genuine. It took him by surprise, and the pair looked at him as if he had done something amusing that they hadn't quite caught. "It's nothing. Let's just say that you, Queen Baraha, had a point, and now I am here," Raymond replied and took a deep breath. "Now, I see Draudillan is here. Tell me what happened. I should greet her properly after the meal and I'd rather not look foolish." His face grew pale as the story was relayed, and slowly darkened. "The Elf King is here. I pray that whoever he faces first in the arena is not a woman. Have they released the names of the opponents due to face each other first?" "The smaller rounds began yesterday, just exhibitions mostly, small name fighters or no name fighters. But the Elf King should be up against whoever wins those fights in a few days. Out of all those, 41 are women," Rena explained, and her pitying eyes blinked repeatedly. "They train publicly to build excitement. One of them exceeds all the others. She's certain to win, and worse, she has a child with her to watch her fight." "I see," Raymond answered as against his will the grotesque scene came to mind. The brute's triumph, and then her horror as she realizes the defeat means so much more than she first knew. "I should warn her. Where do they practice?" "The common grounds around the arena. As she draws a crowd with her displays of strength, you'll find her very easily." "Someone tried to warn her already, but it did no good," Rena said, and Raymond felt a thought. "I will think of something," he promised, and shifted his attention to the head of the table as the council members stood up at once and servants began to wheel in carts laden with food and drinks on platters of silver and in goblets of gold. "I'll go at sundown. And hope for the best," he told himself before resuming his focus on the gathering of nations. When Raymond entered the room he found that Nua had already laid out a meal for him. It was fairly simple fare, a roast haunch of venison with a small helping of brown sauce resting over it, a side of mushrooms and a hunk of fresh-baked bread. The whole thing was steaming hot. One bite was taken out of each portion. "I've tested the food, Raymond, it's safe to eat," Nua said, and then pointed to a stack of papers beside the dish. "Also, these came for you." I opened them of course, and ran my hands over the paper. Nothing was poisoned. For a moment her eyes lingered on the papers, and Raymond's lingered on her. A depth of sadness was there that seemed to have pushed aside the anger that normally seethed just beneath the surface. "Thank you. I suppose you won't be eating with me?" "No," she replied to him, "I've already eaten. I ate before I tested your food and opened your letters." I see," he said and took a seat. "Is there anything of interest?" "Yes. You have letters from all of your comrades. It seems your correspondence reached the slain theocracy and hit many places, and it is still spreading. They are outraged at your blasphemy, demanding you return to explain yourself. In addition, there is a letter, from Berenice, warning you to take care when you do come back. A string of murders, no, slaughters have taken place over the course of the last few weeks, all targeting priests and priests in training of the 6 gods. It's gotten bad enough that they're conducting a joint operation of the Aganti and Black Scriptures to bring the murderers down." Nua, curiously enough, didn't seem mirthful about that in the least. "I see. I don't have much time, I need to get changed and go to the arena," he said and explained the arrival of the Elf King and his intention. Nua pursed her lips and crossed her arms. "Absolutely not." "I'm sorry?" Raymond asked. "I said, absolutely not." Nua gave the order again. "Do you have a death wish?" "No." "Why?" Raymond asked. "Because these letters arrived, Raymond. They arrived here from the slain theocracy not even 3 weeks after they were sent from Peronia. It means the slain theocracy got directly involved in making sure this communication got here fast. They might have used flight magic to bring them, but if they did that, they could bring assassins too. What if they think you're behind those killings?" She demanded an answer, and his mouth opened and closed like a fish without saying anything or making a sound. I know, it's absurd, but it doesn't need to make sense to be believed. You only got one letter of warning. Either the rest don't care if you die or think you're involved. I can't act as your bodyguard effectively in a place like the training grounds. Not by myself, I can't. Nua shook her head. Not at that hour at least. We'll go in the morning if you insist. And besides, if the woman you're talking about is the one that all the gossip happens over, the one called Shitzy, then she won't be there now anyway. She leaves to spend time with her daughter and husband in the late afternoon. Oh, I see. Raymond sat at the table and began to pick at his food. Tomorrow then. But aren't you going to your room now? I cancelled it. I'm sleeping here. Nua answered. He snapped his head up from the food on his plate. Come again? He asked. I'm sleeping here, Nua said it again. If that correspondence can reach you, so can people, and right about now there are a lot of people who will want you dead. It's time for the second half of my duties to begin, keeping you alive. He looked her over again like it was the first time. She was alive, solidly built elf. Her ears were presently lowered and a sour glower on her face that was somehow still beautiful now that her golden hair was longer than it was when they met. Her steady stare promised him he wouldn't win an argument, and she remained silent, almost daring him to argue. So you're serious? About protecting me? He asked her and she gave an instant sharp nod. You're the best chance my race has had in years. I'm not going to lose you to some stupid lawful sweet idea of saving a young woman who isn't even in danger yet. Nua shook her head with vigor, casting the golden strands of hair about. Not happening. I'll take you there tomorrow, and I've dismissed Celia, given her enough money to go back to where her brothers are and even expand their farm. So I'll be driving you again. And where will you sleep? Raymond asked. He turned his eye toward the large bed, and then back to her. With no window here, the only way in is the door, so I'll sleep against that. If they kill me, you'll wake up, she said matter-of-factly. I'm not going to ask you to die for me. After he stopped when her fingers covered her lips. You're not asking. I'm not asking if you want me to. I'm telling you this is what I'm going to do. You're the first truly good human I've known in I don't know how long. Even those who I don't think were all bad. Even those stopped short of good. A human willing to put their life on the line for my kind, to help us even at the cost of his friendships, his status. I can barely believe you're even real. I'm definitely not going to let anything take you away. You're hard to argue with, Raymond said succinctly and began to tear into his food with her smug and cocky grin growing by the second and shining down at him. She raised her hand above the waist-high post. While various other would-be combatants were doing their best to show their skills, it was no question who drew the most eyes. Smash! The crowd shouted, and she brought her fist down. The ground shook, rumbling beneath their feet like a storm cloud overhead, and the post was gone. Her fist came up and her hands went to her hips. Applause followed. The post was buried in the ground and a light cloud of dust began to settle around Zesh's feet. Shizzy! 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 Her newfound fans began to chant her assumed name while the sun rose ahead of her. The grounds on which she stood were wide open, punctuated occasionally by training posts and heavy weights. Practice weapon racks lay near at hand, and many a broken implement lay cast off, while young servants rushed replacements out almost as fast as the old ones could be shattered. Who wants a quick exhibition? She asked. Just a few blows, I promise I won't hurt you. The crowd stepped back a few paces, and despite a few envious glares from the other fighting women, none stepped forward to volunteer. I volunteer. A hand went up from the crowd, and a gasp went up, and the crowd parted to reveal the madman. Zesh's face went pale. You? She gasped as the middle-aged man took a step forward. His formal robes were gone and in their place was something she hadn't seen him wear in years. Training attire. Close-fitting leather gear, complete with his standard knives. Shitzy? Raymond asked and cocked his head. That's the name you went with? And you didn't even bother to dye your hair? It was then that her surprise twisted into a wrath. At his back was a collared elf. She stepped into view and looked over to Raymond, her mouth open to speak. Son of a bitch, Zesh, she bellowed and charged.